Two Words Publishing presents To Steal a Heart, written by Jen Turano, narrated by Andrea Ems. Chapter 1. November 1886, New York City. It was quickly becoming evident that she, Miss Gabriella Goodhue, might very well be arrested in the not-too-distant future, and all because she'd convinced herself that sneaking into a high-society costume ball would be a relatively easy feat, given her past life as a street thief. Unfortunately, over the 13 years she'd been off the streets, her skills with planning a covert campaign had obviously suffered. Not once had she considered that dressing as a gentleman dandy from the French aristocracy would garner attention from young ladies interested in making her acquaintance, but that's exactly what it had done. It was only a matter of time until one of those ladies realized Gabriella was not a gentleman, which would then most assuredly lead to some unpleasant questions. "I'm completely baffled by your identity, sir," a young lady dressed in an elaborate peacock costume said, sauntering closer to Gabriella. "It was very naughty of you to paint your face so effectively, but could you possibly be Mr. Hammond Gregor?" Her gaze traveled over Gabriella's form, one Gabriella had cleverly stuffed. "You seem quite fit, and Mr. Gregor is known to spend an inordinate amount of time in the boxing ring."
"It would ruin the mystery of the evening if I divulged my identity too soon,"
Gabriella returned in a raspy voice that she could only pray sounded suitably masculine. Another lady, this one dressed as a princess, tittered, "Oh, I do love a good mystery and adore puzzling out clues." She sent Gabriella a waggle of glove-covered fingers. "Speaking of mysteries, have you read the latest by Montague Morland? I found it to be a most riveting read." "Did someone just mention Montague Morland?" Glancing to the right, Gabriella blinked and blinked again, hoping that the sight of Miss Daphne Beekman wandering up to join them would turn out to be a mirage. Because of the two jobs Daphne was responsible for that evening, drawing attention to herself wasn't one of them. Remaining inconspicuous until Gabriella could steal away to the second floor had been Daphne's first order of business, at which time Daphne's second job would take effect, that of acting as a lookout to make sure no one happened in on Gabriella as she tried to break into a safe that certainly didn't belong to her. In the past, Gabriella would have had her choice of competent assistants, but since she'd abandoned her life of crime at the ripe old age of 12, she no longer had experienced criminals at her beck and call, which was why she'd had to settle for Daphne, an unlikely partner if there ever was one. Daphne Beekman was a recluse by choice, who barely left the attic room she rented from Eunice Holbrook, and preferred to spend her time with the imaginary characters who stomped around her mind at all hours of the day and night. The only reason Daphne was out this evening was because she was the lone resident at the Holbrook boarding house who fit into the Cleopatra costume that Eunice, the instigator of tonight's adventure, had pulled out of a ratty trunk she'd drug in from the carriage house. Because there'd not been time to procure another costume, Daphne had reluctantly allowed herself to be pressed into service, but only because she felt the mission that needed to be accomplished was worth leaving the safe confines of her attic. Since Daphne was not a lady accustomed to participating in social conversations, why she'd decided to join in on a conversation now, with the daunting circumstances they were already facing, was beyond Gabriella's comprehension. "Are you a reader of Montague Morland?" the lady dressed as a princess asked Daphne. "In a manner of speaking, yes," Daphne said. Gabriella had no idea how Daphne would expand on that curious statement, but she prayed Daphne wouldn't divulge too much, such as the fact that Daphne was Montague Morland. "I don't believe we've been introduced," said the peacock lady, which had Daphne's green eyes widening, as if she'd just realized that inserting herself into a conversation was going to require a certain amount of proper discourse, something Daphne struggled with in the best of situations. "Ah, right," Daphne said before she simply stopped talking and smiled weakly back at the peacock lady. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss